Hello, and welcome to the commentary for Goblin Issue 2. I am Solomon Mars, creator of Goblin, writer and artist as well, of the 555 saga, of which Goblin is Volume 1. So we'll just get right into this. Yes. I don't have a lot to say about the cover of this issue, mostly because it's a reproduction of an in-page, an inside page. I think using the inside inside page as the cover, actually happened because I couldn't think of a proper cover that would capture something that was going on within the pages of the book. I guess one of the actual pages does it well, and I really liked this picture because it showed like impending doom. It showed something. You clearly see the character of Jeff ducking from something. And you're not sure what, so it's like, I'll have to open the book to find out what. I actually have a very personal liking of the logo done in blue, mostly because I love the color blue, but there's something really special about that, the way that it sits on this particular page, against all these other colors, these very bright colors. You have this very mild blue. Yeah, I like that. Okay, so we start our book, starting off where the last issue left off, where Jeff has just confronted for the first time the being that's in charge of all the little wood sprites that have been running around the forest terrorizing people and nearby villages and things like that. Their master, the Null Spirit, who will later reveal himself as Sleemer. I'm just noticing that I used a very specific brush, Photoshop brush for the background. I think I did. The trees in the very, very far background look like a texture. I'm not sure if that's what that is or if it's just a bunch of really random lines. Either way. So, right away I start, giving hints at the idea that as a logicsmith, you have sort of I guess a sixth sense about certain things. A sixth sense. Whereas if you're in the presence of a being that's more powerful than yourself, you can feel it. You can really feel it, And I mean, it's kind of the case even in real life. Like sometimes you can feel energy coming off of other people, It's really intense sometimes. And I don't know how many people actually, believe in that kind of thing that read this book, but I for one, I've felt it, and I've been near people and they've told me they can feel it coming off of me. It's very intense, but not in a harmful way or a negative way, but just there's an intensity, and that's what's going on here. Yeah, and apparently he can smell it, and that's just me automatically, right from the beginning of the book, playing with that whole subverting things and just kind of going in the opposite direction. The book suddenly took a very intense turn, and then I said, "Oh no, I'm going the other way." And Jeff, as a character, is just being rude, and he's just like, he's telling the guy he stinks, and it really gets his attention. Like, Sleemer wasn't really even aware of what was going on down there. I mean, he's so big, he didn't even see Jeff really approach, and he notices Sankofa. Pretty much, he notices him, and Sankofa he's very much aware of what is going on. Them essentially both being spirits, in a sense. Sankofa, technically is a spirit. He's trapped in a sprite's body, but he would be relegated to spirits. Essentially, he would easily be recognized by a spirit as a spirit, even though he looks like a sprite, mostly because of his power, the energy he lets off. And so, and Sleemer recognizes this, and he's asking him, why he's hanging around this mankind as if he was a pet. And Sleemer is immediately showing that he's from an older generation of sprites and spirits and beings on Eravana, which is this planet, where there was a clear division between the lower universe, the middle universe, and the higher universe, and sort of like a class system. And he's a being that was born with logic. It is natural. It is a natural gift that he was born to be able to use. He didn't have to learn it. It is his birthright. And he's, from that generation that feels that they are privileged to have the knowledge of the universe be bestowed upon them so easily. It's like it's like their family, their family passes it on. It's their birthright and things like that. Whereas, I guess I can explain some of the history of the planet, which I'll have to explain more in the Goblin data book online on DeviantArt. Is that it's generally thought of in some circles, especially within sprites and spirits, that the mankind stole the knowledge of logic from sprites and spirits who are naturally born with the knowledge. Not a complete knowledge, but they are born with the knowledge. And so it's kind of a prejudice that's held against them by many, not all, but by many. And it has been for a long time since mankind's essentially emerged and started using logic, because they didn't always. But it was something. In other circles, it's thought that it was something that was taught to them by who. It's not really said. I mean, like, there were early logic saints, and that's early logic smiths, the first ones to really emerge and use logic are the ones that are called logic saints, essentially the original logic saints, which is something that I'll definitely get more into as the book goes on. But it's thought in some circles that they were taught by sprites and spirits, whereas in some circles on the other side, it's thought that they stole this knowledge. The truth is kind of out there, and it's nebulous. No one really knows the truth except for those people that existed in that time period, and they're all dead. except maybe there are, some sprites or some spirits that still exist, but where they exist, who knows? um. So clearly, Sankofa was a little insulted by being thought of as Jeff's pet. Uh, yeah, and Jeff is a little insulted, and Sleemer is a little insulted. Everyone's insulted now. Uh, Sleemer is mostly insulted because Jeff is speaking directly to him and speaking in his language. There is a language that they speak. Spirits and sprites and things, they don't speak, for lack of a better term, English. Or, well, it's not even necessarily English. Well, the book is in English because I speak English. But it's not an earthbound language that they speak. And it's certainly not a language that a mankind would know right off the bat. But Jeff does speak what is considered the Anima Ruha tongue. It's an ancient language, the language of the universe, the oldest language of the universe, the essence of the universe. It's the essence of logic. And so Jeff speaking it to Sleemer is kind of insulting to him, but only because he's from an older generation. There are plenty of spirits or sprites that if Jeff spoke to them that way, it wouldn't faze them. It's like it's like someone who speaks one language goes to another country but can speak that language also in that foreign country. And people are like, oh, well, okay, you speak my language. Oh, okay, that's cool. And it's that same kind of deal. But Sleemer is older, so he's from an older generation, and so he's more insulted by this mankind. It just kind of brings up those old prejudice that he was taught. Yeah. And so, more of Jeff just kind of just being Jeff. He sits down in the middle of this guy's exposition, and he's talking about him being the Sleemer the Destroyer, seventh son of the noble Slade clan, which is really, it means more to me than it will probably ever mean to anyone that reads any of these books, the entirety of the series. Mostly because I've written an entire histories for this series that predate issue 1 by thousands of years. I've written thousands of years of history, not year for year for year, but jumping through gaps, of hitting certain special things and certain historical events and things like that. And so I also had to create historical families, clans, factions, nobilities, and things like that. Their empires that no longer exist, and all this stuff I have, in books that I've created for myself. And some of it will come up and be told, and not just the Goblin data book, but also in the series, and then some of it won't. One of the things that probably won't come up really too much is talking about the seven sons of the Slade clan and things like that. That's just Sleemer, doing what people did in that ancient time. It's kind of within the nobility, to announce yourself and your lineage before battle. It's a very I believe in medieval times they did stuff like that, and I know in feudal Japan they did things like that on the battlefield, and it's very much that same kind of thing, announcing your nobility, your heritage, your lineage, and things like that. And so that's all he's doing. But Jeff just kind of he sees it as just rambling. It's just exposition, just mindless rambling, and he's just like, okay, whatever. And he sits down, and Sankofa is whispering in his ear. He's just like, he's like, let me handle this, because he knows that Jeff opening his mouth could get them in a lot of trouble in the presence of this particular spirit. He knows Sankofa is very much aware of the danger. Jeff, he doesn't care. I like the foot in that picture. I don't know. And more talking about all this stuff. The Slade clan being a part of the Black Fungus House, which is a noble house that only pertains to spirits and sprites, and they were essentially wiped out during the major war, the war that kind of started this whole thing off, by the very first Crimson King, which is the great grandfather of the current Crimson King. I believe I believe that if I remember my own created history, there's only been 4. It's either 3 or 4. I cannot remember, and that's really sad. But that's how much knowledge is stuffed in my head. I have stuff written down, but it'd be rude for me to walk away from the mic and pick up the paper. I'm just kind of doing this on the fly. None of this is prepared ahead. None of it's prepared ahead of time or anything. I'm just going into the books, and as I see stuff, I talk about it. Which probably means I'll miss some things that I would think about later. But I'm always free to questions. I mean, I always have been. People ask me questions all the time about little things in the story, and I say feel free. But yeah. The Crimson Kings are not the only kings to ever create, to ever start a war on this planet. This planet it's always been at war, which is just kind of the reality of my world. Not just the world in my dreams, but the reality of the world that we live in. War has existed for, I guess, as long as we have, mankind. We've always just tribal battles and things like that, and as history progresses, it escalates and it gets more intense and intensifies. But yeah. So, and Jeff is kind of explaining, in a way to the reader that it's, giving it a time stamp. It's like over 200 years ago, which is technically correct. I believe it's about 200 years ago. It's just about 200 years ago, but Jeff really wouldn't know because he doesn't study. Excuse me. And so there's more exposition, and Sleemer talking about the Black Fungus House falling, and but there were other clans as well that were completely. There were other houses, noble clans and houses that were, or rather clans that came from noble houses that they were completely wiped out, and Sleemer is the last known surviving member of his particular, the Slade clan, which is from the Black Fungus House. The Turidan, I can't even pronounce my own names, which is very bad. The Turidan clan and the Xianvu clan were completely wiped out. They're gone. There's no one left from those clans. And that's not even just kind of it's possible that there's someone that exists out there. No, it's known that that entire clan is completely gone, wiped out. Um, uh, and so Sleemer is just he's got such a big head. He feels that what he's doing is righteous. Them fighting back against mankind and in many ways even monster kind, like spirits and sprites. Some of them hold prejudice against monster kind because monster kind are just like mankind, and they're the same prejudice are held against them that they stole logic from the spirits and the sprites. Monster kind aren't born with that knowledge either. Um, and so there's this war. Like they felt that they went out on this war for what they saw as a righteous cause to purify the world again and take back the knowledge of the universe. And it's and somebody like Sankofa is kind of offended by that. He's a little offended by that. But clearly he's on the side of those that would love to spread logic and teach the knowledge of the universe. But also dealing with the idea that Sleemer he's apparently pretty far north. He's past the Northlandic Southlander border, which is where the Red Castle is actually situated. It's near there. Generally, beings as old as someone as like Sleemer would not be found in the Northlands, because the Northlands are heavily populated by mankind, and the old world is kind of frowned upon for the most part. Like old world traditions and old world things like sprites and spirits are frowned upon, or not really. Well, not always, not in all areas they're not frowned upon, but generally they're ignored and kind of relegated to ancient beliefs and civilization. And this is due in part more recently to the Crimson Kings, their effect on the Northlands and their spread of their ideas, and also the spread of the outlawing of logic. And of course, a being like Sleemer would have a direct relationship with that old world, and so they normally, for the sake of themselves, to protect their own lives, they don't really go too far up past the Southlander Northlandic border. In the Southland, though, it's not really it's not an issue, because the Southland is mostly populated. It's heavily populated by monster kind. There is a division. I mean, you can go into the Northlands and you can find monster kinds there, mixing and mingling with, mankind civilization, but it's not always, I don't want to say accepted. It's not always, I guess accepted by everyone. Mostly because of just old world prejudices that exist in this universe, in the Goblin universe, and also because of old wars that people have long since forgotten why they were started, between mankind's and monsterkind's, and just old ancient rivalries that still exist in the form of prejudice, and it's so weird. I'm going off on a tangent, so I'll try not to, because this is all stuff that will be touched on in the book. So you got a little bit of a little. a little inside heads up tidbit, whatever you want to call it. I don't know. um, so yeah, Sleemer's laughing at Sankofa, talking about the war never ended. Uh, and then he drops a interesting little hint that I do slightly wish that I hadn't talked about just yet. Where the book is currently now, this is something that I wouldn't mind talking about, but it's talking about it so far ahead of that portion of the story. Sleemer talking about the 12 princes of the Dearth Citadel are moving closer to the North Atlantic border, and it's just like, wow, that's something that really shouldn't be talked about right now. But it works as a little bit of intrigue, you know. If anyone actually read that line and went, I wonder what that's about, especially after the fact that I never talked about it again, you know, hey, it's going to eventually come up. So there's that. Gosh, and that's one of the things that I noticed that I do, and in a lot of these stories, in a lot of the early issues, I do drop a lot of clues at future storylines, and I talk about things and then I never speak on it again, and that's part of me, you know. Just I plant seeds and then walk away and let that seed grow into something, and usually what I'm hoping that it does is it's growing as far as intrigue on behalf of the readers. You know, I want them to kind of be curious and inquisitive, just kind of curious rather about what these things are that are being talked about in the story, and you know, and therefore they keep reading to see if there's any sort of resolution to that. And for the most part, a lot of the things that are talked about in the first few issues, there's no immediate resolution, because it's something personal that I like. I like sort of the long payoff. You know, I don't like instant gratification. I'm very much an advocate, I guess, against instant gratification. I find it kind of appalling. The idea that there should be an instant payoff. I feel like some things are better when they're kind of teased, and then, you know, you're kind of it kind of plays out over an extended period of time, you know, and little clues and hints and pieces to the puzzle sort of come into place over time. I like that personally, and so that's the way that my stories play out. Like, I'm sure a lot of people would consider, especially with the first two issues, Goblin to be an action story, or maybe even an action adventure story. But I very much consider it to be a mystery adventure. You know, and I know that's a little strange, but that's how I work. I am a bit of a mystery writer. I love mystery. I'm not really big on direct action. I'm more so interested in intrigue, in mystery, and clues, and solving puzzles, and things like that. Yeah. So, anyways, and he's talking about the Monster King and riding into the Empire of Sands and claiming the throne of Asfa, which is something that I will definitely touch on later. But it is literally a throne. It is literally this really beautiful throne that I'll talk about that later. In coming issues of Goblin, especially once the Crimson King really starts taking a more direct role in the story, and he will. I know I talk about him a lot in the first few issues, and then you don't see him, but that's because he's not integral. He's not integral to the plot development right now. He plays a bigger role later. much as the Monster King does, and a lot of the things that are talked about in the first few issues. They play bigger parts later on, but it's me wanting to get people familiar with some things, some elements of the story. Um, yeah, Grand Procession of Fire, whatever. And Jeff noticing, oh my goodness, noticing this gross, pussy existence happening over here. Ugh, ugh, gross. I think that was the first instance of someone talking about the balance. Um, mm, these things growing. Ugh, they're just so gross. Look at them. Ugh. And of course, Sankofa was completely distracted by Sleemer's exposition. Jeff was not. So he calls him. He calls him on it. And he's just, he's just like, shut up. This is stupid. You're stupid. Which is really Jeff just is me through Jeff just going, I hate exposition. I hate that kind of thing in story. Really, I really do. When they talk, when characters speak in just constantly, and they're talking about plot stuff that should be shown, and they're explaining it. That's definitely a thing that I feel you should never do in a comic story, an illustrated story like this, a comic book, or even in animation. And I know I occasionally break this rule that I try to set for myself occasionally, but you should never have a character explain something that they could actually just do. You could just show. And I understand that sometimes with animation it's a matter of constraints as far as budget, but I find often that it's just the fact that someone just didn't feel like thinking about it, or didn't have a clear picture in their head of what it was that they were explaining. And that's just a matter of not getting to that point where you can tell stories that well. I'm not saying that I can tell stories really well, but I have learned, like some of my older work, there's exposition. There are characters explaining things, talking about things instead of just doing it and showing it. Even in like flashbacks and things like that, it should be more so shown. Sometimes it's just something that should be shown instead of a character talking about all this beauty, describing things in such wonderful detail, and then you don't show it. It's just kind of, I don't know. I feel like it's ripping off the reader. You're kind of you're depriving them of really what's going on inside your imagination. The thing that's inside of your head that made you write that thing, that character explaining it. It's in your head. You just have to tap into it and really figure out how to draw it the best possible way you can. Even if you don't properly convey it the way that if it's it's not as vivid as it is in your mind, still you got it out, and your readers will be able to interpret it in some way. At least they'll be able to, you sort of bridge that gap that's created by strictly text, dialogue and exposition. I love this picture, just because of his hand going, ew. Oh. Sankofa's like, what are you talking about? And then boom! He gets hit in the back. Yes. I love that, I'm not a big fan of the sound effects that I used in this, because I decided to do them all in Flash. My reasoning for it was, when I do my thumbnails, I don't really do thumbnails per se. At the time, I used to do thumbnails. Currently, though, I just draw directly. What you see in current issues, probably since about issue 6 on, what, no, not even 6, about issue 7 on. What you see in those pages is actually what I drew the first time. Like, I don't draw thumbnails and then try to reproduce my thumbnails, because I found that I lose something when I try to redraw it. I lose that initial kineticism, that happens when you're drawing and you're really into the picture. I lose it when I try to reproduce it. It's almost like I lose, the same way that it's lost when you go from your rough pencils to your more refined pencils, but especially when you go to your inking. And so I try to maintain, that kineticism by just going directly from that to, my cleanups. And sometimes I hand letter my sound effects, and I really wanted to have some of those. Sometimes they look a certain way, and I like the way that they look. They really look really funny to me, and they fit with the artwork. And so I wanted to reproduce them, but I couldn't quite reproduce them in Flash. Mostly because I couldn't manipulate them the same way that I do now, where I can manipulate sound effects in Photoshop and drop them behind characters in front, make them really transparent. I couldn't do it, and so there was that problem. Plus, I believe there was something wrong with Photoshop, and it wouldn't load any of my fonts. So at the time, I just had to just go ahead and finish this book. Yeah. In comes these creatures that I don't think they have a name. They went through several different design changes before I decided on this particular design, including at one point they had mushrooms on their back. And I think, yeah, you can actually see some of the early developmental sketches for them. There's a Goblin sketchbook on DeviantArt in the Goblin group. I uploaded it there, and you can actually see some of the early development sketches, not just of Goblin in general, but of this particular monster. Or I guess it's a sprite. It's not a monster, it's a sprite. It's just a very large sprite. Yeah. I love how it looks, though. And I love the fact that I used the color blue for it. Because I could have easily just made it green, made it very lizard-like, but I went blue. That smack is awesome. Smack! It just made sense to me, like when you get pinned down to the ground, and it just made sense. It was obvious. You're pinned down, this thing is over you, and you really can't move. And how do you get this thing from on top of you? Well, what do you have around you? Well, you have the ground. Grab a big chunk of the ground and smack it over the head with it. Yay! Knocked it over. And he runs off. I don't necessarily like this running scene. It was supposed to look a little bit different than this. You were also supposed to see, oops, I didn't mean to go backwards. You were also supposed to see Jeff scoop Sankofa up. But in my mind, the book is animated. So that made sense to show him scooping him up and then running. But I needed to get the story kind of moving. So I just kind of show him running off with Sankofa in his hand. And this particular picture, strangely enough, is very pretty. It's prettier than earlier pages. Mostly because I really hit it with a lot of Gaussian blur all over. And started playing with depth even more. I also like the way the trees, there are like 4 different levels of trees on here, and it just kind of worked. Yeah, that one's kind of cool, showing from Sleemer's point of view down there. And you can just barely see Jeff running through the trees. The dialogue bubble kind of points to where he is. You can just barely see him. I hate this picture. Jeff really looks very Cro-Magnon. He looks very Neanderthalish, heavy brow, and just very pencil neck. I don't know what I was thinking. But yeah, and then chasing, and then Jeff, suited up again, ready for action. Drooling a little, I see. Oh my. The forest that's in here actually is based on several forests that I went through as a kid. Just my friends and my little sister, we would just go running through the forest and exploring all over the place in kind of the area that I spent probably, I guess, the later half of my childhood and my teenage years and stuff. God, I make it sound like I'm super old or something. Anyways, wow. No, wow. Yeah, wow. Oh, when I was a kid. No, wow. But, I mean, it's not something I necessarily do anymore. I mean, I go hiking in the mountains now. But my friends don't come with me, and definitely not my little sister. She's kind of a city kid now. But a lot of these are based, a lot of the way the woods look are based on different areas that we ended up in. Some were very bright, and the green of the trees was very bright, and then some were very dark and murky, and there were creeks running all the way through them and things like that. And for some odd reason, they would be darker, I guess because the foliage was much denser, and so the trees would have a darker tone, a darker look. And that's what I was really coming across, and I was trying to come across with in these pictures. And Jeff just stomped that sprite's head into the ground, and then he got his back ripped open. And I really, I thought that was kind of funny that would happen to him. He got caught off guard. You can't always be the champion. You can always be the winner. And clearly Jeff is not, because he's got scars all over him, and that was one of the things I showed a lot in early books. Jeff just has scars all over him. I mean, I have not a lot of scars, but I definitely have childhood war wounds from where I would, my friends and I, when we just go running around and jumping off of things and running into things, and we get cut up and stuff, and and it's just fun. And I mean, unfortunately, even in my adult life, I've done some things. I've run headfirst into a tree, running behind a couple of my friends with a machete, just being playful. They were in no danger, and ran face first into the trunk of a tree. For some odd reason, it did not register that I was running directly in that direction. And I've also fallen down a mountainside while hiking, and rolled down the mountainside, and my entire back was cut up because I rolled over small shrubs. Yeah. And my shirt lifted up while I was rolling down, and I got nice and cut up. Yeah. So anyways, I love this scene where his head snaps out of the ground. He pulls it. It's like a rubber band. Snap! That's really cool. His little horn is broken. And they go chasing after him again. Just chasing him through the woods. Just an excuse to show Jeff running, and just, to create as much distance between Jeff and Sleemer as possible, because, in all honesty, if Jeff were fighting around Sleemer, if he was fighting these creatures around Sleemer, he'd be at a serious disadvantage, because Sleemer would just use logic to basically keep him in place, so that they could spear him with their little horns or something like that. Yeah. So this is I love this particular sequence of yeah, it's just like he's running, and then he's like, oh, he spots a little rock, and I love this. He squats, jumps up into the air, boom, lands on the side of the rock, and then pushes himself off the rock. Ugh! I love that, and he's just going straight at them, and boom, barrels right into them. Oh, that's great. But of course, it's Jeff, and he's very reckless. He's very reckless. He just keeps going, and he hits the tree, and it's just like, wow. I love that, that idea of him being that reckless. I mean, it's very much like I was as a kid. Um, and for some odd reason, as I got older, by the time I, was a teenager, I started fearing for my life, I guess, and not jumping off things as much and throwing myself around. I don't know, and I just became really humble. Not humble. What am I thinking? Passive, I guess. Less aggressive and more passive. Uh, and I'm really passive like now. Although you wouldn't be able to tell necessarily from my work, but my work is it's really like something like Goblin, with all the action and stuff. It's just that's me. That's what I like. That's you know you know I don't know. I mean, it's a driving force. Action. Movement. It helps. And really move a story along. And I like those kinds of stories. While I like mystery, I like action to a degree. I don't like pure action stories. They're very boring. To have nothing but action, nothing but fighting, blah 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 blah. It's just I don't know. I need there to be a reason for the fighting, more than just that's the clear bad guy. I need there to be more than that, and that's why I try to create a level of depth to the characters. An antagonist is more than just an antagonist, and sometimes on many occasions. The line gets blurred between whether or not they are truly the bad guy, or if they're just misunderstood by a particular person that may not even be the good guy. Talk more about that in later issues. Definitely. It's just one of those things where Jeff is just about to cuss and doesn't quite. Something happened. And there's the cover again, and you see why that particular cover is used, and cut that tree pretty much. You just broke it in half. This tail, which could be very dangerous if that hits your head. Yeah. And then this is one of those over-the-top situations, just the over-the-top action that I was doing in the first issues in order to show the possibilities of Jeff. He picks up this tree just by digging his hand into it, which I would think would just, his fingertips would just be a bloody mess. But he just digs his hands right into this trunk, this piece of tree, picks it up like a baseball bat, swings it, and just knocks this poor creature. Well, really, I'm not going to take any pity on these things. They were born bad. Just knocks it straight into just into the stratosphere, just gone. And then he takes on the other one. I love how there's a little smoke, coming up, popping up there in the back, after he dropped the tree branch. This thing charges right at him, and I love this. There's a lot of weight in this picture. I really like that. There's like a clear struggle. The thing has its arm on his leg. It's pushing on his leg. Jeff's fingers are digging into his neck. There's a lot of weight in this picture. That's something I learned to do a lot in school when I was learning animation, how to create weight on a character, because you have that's something you have to do. Like if you make a character pick something up, they have to show weight, and that's something I just translated, into my work. Like I've always kind of played with stuff like this, but even more so after I went to school. So I did learn many things. And translated a lot of stuff that I learned for animation into comics, and vice versa. Stuff that I learned for comics, I've been able to translate into animation. Yeah. He missed him. Oh, missed again. Oh, or did he? Jeff is not very pleased about that. Oh, and he just kind of grabs his neck, even more. He just kind of clutches it. Little spittle coming out of the monster's mouth there, or blood, probably blood. Now that I think about it, and he's grabbing so hard. He's bracing so hard that he snaps the horn on this thing, and and it just kind of tries to strike him, and takes it like I've seen, like people when they're suppressing an animal, like a large dog, and they push it down, they push its head down, push it down to the ground to kind of, to suppress it. And that's what he slams its head down to the ground, takes its tail and in his other hand, and he just yanks it off. I was like, oh my god. When I first thought of it, I was like, wow, this is really extreme. This may be going too far. I wonder how people are going to accept this, or if they will accept it, Just him just taking it just to the extreme. And technically, this is a plant that he's ripping apart. It's a plant, not an actual flesh and blood animal. It's a flesh plant. Anyways, yeah. And then he starts beating him over the head with his own tail, which is just me just being really ridiculous. I love that though. But that's Jeff, he's just that kind of guy. He's really, really just gets so just completely overcome by the adrenaline rush. He just loses himself sometimes. Yeah. And Sankofa has to be there as an anchor to bring him back. Yeah, that thing is dead. That picture's kind of cool. And he just drops it and walks off. Doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. I love that kind of walk. That cowboy sort of what do you call that? That just got off of a horse. I have saddle leg sort of walk. It's a very cocky walk, Ooh, that's creepy. A root popping up, and then boom, you see there are eyeballs all over the root. Ah, gross. Jeff is being watched. By who? One guess. So, and this was me subverting, deliberately, just, kind of subverting it. It's like, there was a little action, and then suddenly, something very mundane, like mixing in very mundane things. And that's the thing, you're on this epic adventure, and the whole time that you're in this fight, you couldn't help but notice there was a rock in your shoe. It's like, it's so annoying. Because it's a real life annoying thing, you get a rock in your shoe. And yeah. I figured, why couldn't it happen in a situation like that? I imagine superheroes get rocks in their shoes all the time, or action stars, in the middle of, you're traipsing through an area that has loose gravel. Yeah, you're going to get a rock or two in your shoe, And in the middle of a fight, you can't stop and go, hold on, let me get this out of my shoe. No. You have to keep going. And then he realizes there were 3, not 2. And, charge, and instead of actually showing this fight play out, I just cut straight to Jeff showing up by Sleemer and showing that clearly there was a serious fight. Initially, I was I was actually a little concerned with the degree of blood to show in the story. Excuse me. But I don't know how to quite explain it. Blood, I guess I can just out and out explain it. Blood is a very necessary part of the story. It's not just, Jeff is bleeding here. He is. But I was more so worried and concerned about someone, or maybe some ones, coming down on me about the degree of blood that was being shown in the book, or seeing it as overly violent, and especially on like DeviantArt, where they do have these things where they want you to put your stuff in categories, and if there's too much gore, they kind of want you to sort of they want you to kind of sort of make sure that you don't expose people to too much. You're sort of self-censoring. They give you the option to self-censor, but there is always the option that if you don't and your stuff is very extreme, that they will pull it. They'll ban it and possibly you. And so I was really concerned with whether or not I was pushing it too far. But the story, it was a necessary component to the story that I show that Jeff, while he can do very extraordinary things, he still bleeds. He still can get injured badly, and I also wanted to convey, as the story goes on, that blood is a integral part of the story, and more so about logic, being a logic smith. Blood is a catalyst. It's not the only catalyst. There are many catalysts, but blood is the most personal catalyst that a logic smith could use to invoke, to create incantations, and it's something I didn't directly talk about. I just kind of show it, but it's something that I will talk about in coming issues. I know I keep saying that about everything, but it's the truth. A lot of it is actually going to happen in probably the next 4 to 6 issues from the point that I'm at now, which is currently in 11A, 11B, and 12A. That's where I'm at right now as of this recording, which may not necessarily be where I am when you actually see this, hear this, both. So yeah, here I was playing with the idea that Sleemer is using such intense logic. He's doing such intense and complex incantations, and it's something that's not really spoken about. I don't speak on it. I don't really talk about it because like I said before, I don't really like when characters are talking about stuff. Like, oh my gosh, his incantations are so complex and so intense that it's making my nose bleed. I don't want the character to explain that. I just show it. And granted, you don't really understand why they're talking about Jeff's nose bleeding. It's something that I would talk about later, and in the hopes that readers would go, oh, that's why in that older issue, kind of, and make a connection. But I haven't really talked about it, and I feel bad for not really talking about it since then. But yes, that's why. Sleemer is actually in his head, without speaking the incantations out loud. He's actually producing some very, very complex incantations that are creating essentially that shield around him, because he knows he's going to fight Jeff. He's going to fight Jeff, and he knows Jeff will fight him back, especially combining himself with Senkofa like that. He recognizes that he's going to have a fight, and he's planning on killing Jeff. And so the intensity is just, it's making his nose bleed. And then, this is me explaining what Senkofa is to the reader, and that he is no ordinary sprite. In fact, he isn't a sprite at all. He is a logic artifact, a spirit trapped in a vessel by his enemy. And I don't know how many people still remember that. And it's just like in issue 1 where I spoke about how old Jeff is. And here, I pretty much only talk about the fact that Senkofa is a logic artifact once. And, Jeff is like, yeah, okay, whatever. Tell me something I don't know, whatever. And, it's just, he's so, I don't know, he's so Jeff, God, he just doesn't care. And so, it's just, Sleemer sort of tries to warn Jeff about the nature of using a logic artifact, and even more so about Senkofa. There's definitely more to Senkofa than meets the eye. And Jeff is like, whatever, I don't care. There are things that Jeff does know that most people don't realize he does know. And so, now he's using his blood as a catalyst for doing incantation for logic, for the sake of logic. And since there's plenty of it, now you can see his nose is really bleeding here. It's really bad. Wow. And so, yeah. Uh, Sleemer's like, oh, he recognizes now that Jeff is a logic smith. Because up until now, Jeff didn't use logic. He just fought, with his fist, with brute strength. And now he's like, oh, you're a logic smith. It's like, then we'll duel, which is essentially a devil's duel. That's what it's called. When two logic smiths fight, it's called a devil's duel. And I didn't actually use that exact term here, but whatever. Jeff's like, no, not a duel, an execution. And you think Sleemer is just going to sit there and probably fight him without moving. Use incantations or something. You don't really know. Well, maybe you knew. I don't know. I was hoping you didn't know. And then the ground is trembling here, and I didn't put the sound effect in it, and I'm very ashamed of that. There was supposed to be rumbling right here to cue that the ground is shaking. And this is actually me kind of going against my own rule. Sankofa explaining that the nose bleeding was that Sleemer was using logic the whole time. And, then Rip, his tentacles, or really not tentacles, but sort of roots, are pulling up from the ground. And Jeff I love that look of disgust. Ugh! Ugh! And that was really me thinking about what that would look like in reality if suddenly trees rose up and decided to start walking, and their roots pulling up through the ground, and what that would look like. And it would just be kind of a horrifying look, just a horrifying display. And that's pretty much the face that I would make. And just, I love that, like, the look of the root dragging. It was, as it was pulling up out of the ground, it left a trail behind, and little chunks and pieces falling and stuff. And I actually, I'm not pleased with this picture at all. The original, at this particular point, I was actually doing thumbnails, and the thumbnail, that this is based on, is the original sketch, the original drawing that I did when I woke up from the dream, when I woke up from my sleep, and I drew it in the dark, and I drew out this drawing. I think it's actually in the Goblin sketchbook. You can see the original drawing of Sleemer standing up and the trees falling off, and there were supposed to be more trees on him and stuff, and because it was supposed to look like a hill that trees had grown on naturally over time, and you don't really get a sense of his scale in this picture, really. I mean, not to the degree that I wanted it to look. I wanted him to be massive, but honestly, when it comes down to the fight, though, he couldn't be that massive. Otherwise, it would just be ridiculous. There are a lot greater things to come. Hint, hint. Yeah. So, and this is Jeff just kind of being Jeff. And he's like, I guess you're going to chase after me? And he's like, no. Boom. And he's like, no, I'm not going to chase after you. Just going to swat and smash you. And I love this picture. Jeff just kind of he's sort of being knocked out of the way at the same time as he's jumping out of the way, kind of being thrust by the impact of this tentacle, this root hitting the ground and just splitting into it. And then Jeff throwing, he's using one of his incantations, very basic stuff that you can tell by the color, which is something that I went into a little in one of my live streams. I talked about color, and it's something that I'm definitely going to have to get into a little bit more in the explaining in. I will explain it. Oh gosh, well, without spoiling anything, I will explain it in future issues that are coming up. Not necessarily very soon, but that are coming up in Goblin, and there's a reason for explaining the entire basis of color, the spectrum in logic. And if by chance you should be looking at the Goblin data book on DeviantArt, you'll see that they have a spectral range for the characters that actually can use logic. They have a spectral range, and the color shows the intensity, how great their knowledge, not necessarily how great their knowledge is, but I guess technically how great their knowledge is, and the intensity of the logic is, the incantations and things. And so colors like the purples and blues and things like that are on the lower end of the spectrum as far as they are. And and Sleemer obviously is using something far more intense. So what Jeff knows, basic logic, is not going to work. And and Sankofa is letting him know, which definitely is part of the reason why the events that happen later in this issue happen. I love this. It just made sense to me that flying debris, you probably get hit. Got these huge roots slamming into the ground. Pieces of the ground are flying up into the air. I would assume that a big chunk would probably hit you. In this case, it hit Jeff in the face. Right in the nose. Yeah. I thought it just kind of, I don't know, it made sense. It just worked. I don't know. Casualties of war. And here he's getting upset. And I love this. When this idea came to me, I was just like, oh yes. Yay! And this root gonna slam right into him, and wow. And you're like, okay, what happened? But then it's like you're looking and you have this visual clue, and it's like, well, what is that? And then you see, like he's just kind of just blowing away little dust, and basically he sort of duplicated himself. Right then and there, he sort of duplicated himself, and so he's somewhere else, and what was left is sort of a shell. And it's like what is it? Prestidigitation? I don't know if that's the proper word, but it's kind of like teleporting yourself. And when you teleport, you leave a shell. It's kind of like a molt. It's sort of like, what is it? Molting, I think is what snakes, is that what the term is? I believe that's what the term is. When the snake sheds its skin, and it's kind of the same thing here. Like he teleported and he left behind sort of a copy of himself that's just really nothing but ash. And he's above you, what? Oh! And he comes down on him, and he lands right on this logic-based shield of protection, this incantation that's completely covering Sleemer, and it burns. It actually burns, because it's intense, So it is a dangerous thing for Jeff to be doing that, but he's trying to break through it, and you can see it sort of cracking a little, and pieces of it flying off into the air because the energy is pushing off onto Jeff. It's intense, and it's physically pushing, like wind is pushing off. The energy is flowing. It's like if you're near a gas stove and you turn it on, and if you put your hand above it, you can feel the air being pushed up by the flame. You can feel the air kind of being pushed up by the force of that flame. The expelling, of it, and it's burning the oxygen around it, and it's forcing, air above it. It's forcing, and that's kind of what's happening here. And then we, the beginnings of the transformation, and Jeff's kind of like, whoa, he's taking notice that something's going on with his hands, but also all around him, the Sleemer's shield is starting to do things. It's starting to peel away and turn to sort of like weird sort of pieces of it are peeling off, and then it snaps. It just sort of breaks open, and we see Jeff. He's got claws and he's changed and he's kind of and just slicing into Sleemer, and I love that. And Sleemer is just like he's screaming, he's in pain because these are like huge lacerations across his surface, his body essentially, and he's trying to go up, reach up and smack Jeff, but he's running across him too fast, and he just slams and he cuts one of those trees in half, and I love that picture. Jeff just jumping out of the way, just as the root is slamming would just cut him in half actually, and then Jeff landing so hard that he just right into Sleemer, and just it's so gross, it's so intense, and Sleemer just screaming in pain because Jeff is now essentially inside of him, kind of inside of his brain, and just kind of pops right out through his eye, one of his eyes. And this is just me being absurd and just over the top. But it's all stuff that, I just hit the floor rolling in laughter at the thought of this kind of stuff happening, because it's honestly something that I don't think I've ever seen happen before. And so I thought, why don't I do it? Just him just slapping, he's just in so much pain, and he just reaches out at Jeff, and he just running up the tentacle. I love that picture, just running up the tentacle. This is actually something I would love to animate. Oh, look at that. I would love to actually animate this particular scene right here. And then he just jumps up into the air and boom, just puts his hands right into Sleemer, just puts him down. And the whole time he's doing this complex incantation, and it's not Jeff. Like, one of the visual cues of the difference between Jeff and Sankofa is that Sankofa's outlines on his word bubbles are thicker. They're a thicker black. And so what's happening here is it's actually supposed to be cueing you in on the fact that it's Sankofa that is doing this incantation. It's a very complex incantation that he's been doing this whole time, and it was like he was laying dynamite inside Sleemer's body, and it just pow all the way up, and it just kind of cut. It's like cut all the way up him without Jeff actually having to traverse his body. It just cut through his entire body. Split him in half. Boom. I love that. Boom. It's fun. And there he is. He's split in half. Like a little sweet potato. Which essentially he kind of is. He's based on a sweet potato. Yams. I love sweet potatoes. I really like Japanese sweet potatoes. They are a creamier texture. They're these pale sweet potatoes that have a really creamy texture when you eat them. They taste the same as a garden variety. I don't even know where sweet potatoes originated from, but your run-of-the-mill sort of orange sweet potato, they taste the same, but their texture is different. It's creamier. A Japanese sweet potato is creamier, and this is Jeff. He's gone back to normal, and he's covered in Sleemer goo from his adventure inside. And then when Sleemer split apart and kind of shattered, and like pieces of him just kind of went everywhere, and Jeff freaking out. He's freaking out now that he's back in control, and he's just like, and Sankofa's like, Jeff, calm down, and Jeff's like, whoa, what the heck was that? And they start talking about, Sank's trying to, he's trying to explain to him that, you couldn't have fought this spirit, on your own. There's no way you could have fought him, and he's just like, without his help, and Jeff he's really upset because he was essentially like a puppet, a marionette. Sankofa took over his body. He was using his body, and that's how he was able to do the claws. He did that. That is not something that Jeff could do on his own. And so this is kind of the beginning of sort of the ruination of their friendship, that happens in the next few issues where, or rather not even the ruining of their friendship, but sort of Jeff being sort of being distant from Saint, because, realizing that he's not in control. It's all been fun and games up until now, and now he's realizing, okay, this is a little bit more intense than I originally thought. He was playing around being a kid, and now it's definitely more intense. And so anyways, he's like, whatever, let's go get these, the little herbs that, my goodness, that I never even showed, but they existed actually at the top of Sleemer, on the top of him, which is just, that's so video game boss fight kind of situation, But that's exactly why I did it. And that's kind of what I was playing around with, I love that kind of stuff, boss fight kind of idea, or rather a boss fight sort of approach to writing, and even in animation or movies and stuff. I kind of like that, as long as it's done tastefully, it's done sensibly, like, there's a reason for things happening in this way, and you don't do it in a sort of cheesy or campy sort of way where it's literally a boss fight. It's mimicking a video game, but it's very it makes, I don't know, it just I like that kind of thing, and it's not that exact way, but it hints at that sort of kind of idea. And here we are, returned to the village. Eli is close to death. Everyone's kind of given up hope on him. They don't think Jeff is coming back. No one else has come back to this point. At this point, I actually took a little bit more care in drawing Eli's parents than I did the first time. You can tell, just look at the dad's leg. That foot is great, considering. That foot is great. The old chieftain, medicine man there, he looks pretty cool. I just took a lot more care with the characters this time around than I did before. There's a little bit more character in them if you look at them compared to the first issue. God, the face that he's making there. I do often wonder what some of the things that I create taste like. I wonder what that tastes like. Those particular roots that he's holding. They look kind of like carrots, but they're blue. And they have furry sort of furry tops to them. I bet they taste like rutabagas. Rutabagas aren't so bad. And so then Jeff reminds them that he is a goblin and that he bounty hunts essentially for money. And they're just like, oh, womp womp womp. Yeah. But of course, that was just me being, Jeff, going back to Jeff being a jerk. I kind of like this picture, with that moon. That moon is actually, it's a brush. I have a brush set that are just moons, and I decided to use that instead of drawing the moon, which I do in a much later issue. I draw the moon physically, and that's because I decided to not use this texture, this stamp, this brush, because I don't know. I thought maybe their moon looked different than ours. Maybe it does. Anyways, it's morning, and oh look, Eli, he's looking a little bit better. Yay! Oh, that's great. Oh, he's awake. Oh, he's a little tired, but he's awake. Yay! Everyone's crying and happy and rejoicing. There's Jeff, and he's like, yeah, okay, whatever, kid, you're welcome. Jeff's back to normal. Oh, and he's replaced his ripped up shirt. Yay! He's like, oh, you really are a great warrior like Everett. It's like, yeah, okay, whatever, kid, shut up. And the name's Jeff. And the story, that's kind of the end of the story, and you just, Jeff being Jeff, just like, God, he's such a jerk. He's so ungrateful. He's talking about how he's going to replace the shirt because it's itchy. This was their way of paying him, because it's a small little village, and these people, they clearly, don't have money. Otherwise, they would have hired someone to come into town, into their village, to kill Sleemer. They would have hired a really great local knight, or I don't know, something like that. Some local warrior, some what do you call it? Like a hired gun. They would have hired someone to come in and do that if they had the money. But clearly, they don't have the money. And so they had to pay him with a shirt. But whatever, he wasn't really going to take he wasn't going to take money from them. And that's kind of him showing his soft side. He wasn't going to watch a kid die, so he had to take on the quest. He wasn't going to watch a kid die. He certainly didn't want to be the reason that kid died. He was going to try his hardest. So that's kind of showing that Jeff does have a heart. Yeah. And then there's kind of an ending after the ending, which shows all these bugs all over Sleemer's dead body. And I should probably go ahead and say, because I'll talk about it, not necessarily in an issue of a book. It's only going to come up in the Goblin data book. Bugs in this world replace lower level animals in our world. Like where we have birds, they don't have birds because they have people that look like birds and people that look like dogs and things like that. So your average animals like birds and pigs and cats and dogs and cows and all these kind of animals, deer and cat. I said cats already. They're replaced in this world by things like insects, bugs. Some of them can get as big as a dog or as big as a bear and things like that. And I've replaced basically, if you can imagine, evolution is a step up in this world. Everything is a step up. Has gone the next. They've taken the place of the next thing up on the evolutionary scale. So bugs are like lower level animals, and lower level animals are people. And of course, well, just people are people. That's just, one of those things that I like. I'm not particularly fond of animals existing in a world with anthropomorphic animals, like where a dog person would have a dog for a pet. That bothers me. And while I try not to bring anything realistic, like any real world kind of logic to my stuff, things like that bother me to the point that I cannot put them in my stories. And plus, I like this. I like this idea a lot better. And of course, single cell creatures, amoeba and things like that, are bugs in this world. They take over the place of bugs. Although you don't really see them too much. No. And then, oh my gosh, what has disturbed them? It's a little bitty Sleemer! Oh! And then he says, oh, he's returned. I must tell the Monster King. And he runs off. Oh my. Dun dun dun. There's some other stuff going on. So, hooray! That is the end of Goblin Issue 2, Volume 1 of 555. I want to say thank you for sitting with me through this nearly hour and a half of commentary. This was a longer issue than the first issue. I'm definitely going to try to, bring the time down on these so that they're not so epic. I'm going to try to keep them under an hour. If not, I'm going to definitely try. And I hope to see you on I hope that you'll join me on future commentary tracks and future issues of Goblin. And I just want to say thank you again for reading Goblin and all the wonderful feedback that I've been getting from everyone. And yeah, thank you and goodbye.